Old Stormalong, the sea giant and the battle against the Kraken. Introduction: the rise of a legend. Back when the sea was still a mystery to mankind, when the ocean devoured fragile ships like grain husks in the fury of stormy waves, there came a man born of the sea itself. No one knew who his parents were. They only tell that on a night of violent thunder and raging winds, when lightning tore the sky apart and the wind howled like the spirits of the ocean in wrath, a wooden cradle drifted ashore at a New England harbor. Inside that cradle lay a giant baby, so huge that the fishermen had to use a crane to lift him onto land. No one dared to adopt him, believing he was a sign from the gods, either a gift or a warning. But then the old sailors, men who had lived their entire lives at sea, who had seen whales with broken spines and fought off Caribbean pirates, they were not afraid. They named the child Alfred Bulltop Stormalong, and they raised him with dried fish, hardtack biscuits, and legendary tales whispered by the ship's firelight at night. Soon, Alfred grew as fast as the rising tide. By the age of 12, he stood taller than the tallest mast. Once, as he passed the docks, he bent down and picked up an overturned boat with one hand. They said that when he laughed, the sea calmed to listen, and when he wept, the skies rained for 3 days straight. Sea folk began to call him by a more familiar name, Old Stormalong, for he was the embodiment of a storm, yet the only one who could tame it. But the story of Stormalong wasn't just about his incredible strength. It was the tale of a man who did not belong on land. Every time his feet touched soil, the sky grew darker. But when he returned to the ship, the winds shifted in favor, whales breached as if greeting him, and compasses aligned as though recognizing their master. He feared nothing except injustice and betrayers of the sea. Stormalong overcame the unimaginable. He conquered waves taller than lighthouses, guided ships through clashing iceberg canyons, and once, he dove deep and hauled up a stuck anchor from the ocean floor, with the rope wrapped around his shoulder like a belt. But even as a legend, he remained a man with a heart, one that could love, get angry, and most of all, sacrifice. He once turned down an admiral's rank to keep sailing with his old crew, the only family he ever truly had. They say he could speak to the wind. Maybe it's just rumor. But once, during the greatest storm of the century, when all ships sought refuge ashore, only Stormalong's vessel sliced through the waves, heading straight into the storm's eye, to rescue a lost fleet of cargo ships. When his ship finally returned, the townspeople stood in silence for hours, unable to believe their eyes. The ship was torn and battered, but still upright, like the very soul of the sailor standing at its bow, his gaze far off, his hand on the helm as if to say, "The sea and I, we have nothing to fear from each other." But then, there are forces greater than any storm. A shadow from the ocean depths, spawned from legend, tied to the mysterious disappearance of countless vessels. That monster was known by the one name that even sea veterans dared not utter aloud: Kraken. Kraken was unlike any creature known. It didn't just destroy ships, it erased them. No survivors. No floating wreckage. Only a chilling silence in its wake. And while the rest of the world sought shelter, only one man stood up and declared, "I will find it. And if I do not return, know this: some things are worth dying for." That man was Old Stormalong. The story you're about to hear is not just legend. It is the journey of a man who faced the impossible, rose above himself, and carved his name into the epic ballad of the sea. Are you ready? Then join me now on this great voyage, where every wave is a heartbeat, every gust of wind a whispered tale. About Old Stormalong, the giant sailor who dared to face the sea itself and fought a battle against myth and fear. Chapter 1. The Child of the Storm. New England. A pitch-black night with no moon or stars. Out on the gray sea, towering waves crashed against the rocky shore like angry towers, as if the entire ocean had lost its temper. The wind howled in bursts, like the cries of 1,000 lost souls from the ocean's depths. Coastal villagers bolted their doors and prayed in silence. No one dared to step outside, for tonight, the storm wasn't just a natural disaster, it was the wrath of the ocean's very heart. Then, in the midst of thunder that shook the heavens, a strange object drifted into the small bay of Gloucester, a crude wooden cradle made from ancient oak. It didn't sink despite the battering waves, as though some mysterious force was guarding it. Rocked by the storm, spinning and swaying, the cradle was pushed ashore, right in front of the house of an old sailor named Silas McGrew. When Silas opened the door, the wind burst through, blowing the latch wide. His oil lamp flickered, nearly extinguished. And then he froze. Right before him lay a newborn child, yet 3 times the size of a normal baby, sleeping peacefully in a gigantic cradle, untouched by the storm. No crying. No shivering. And on the baby's forehead, a strange birthmark shaped like a rolling wave, like a prophecy etched in flesh. Silas picked up the child, his hands trembling, unsure whether this was a blessing or a curse. But something in the baby's eyes left him speechless. Calmness. Not the innocence of a child, but the calm of the ocean, right before it unleashes a storm. By morning, the whole village gathered. Some said, "This must be the son of the sea god." Others exclaimed, "No, this child was cast out by the heavens, tossed ashore in punishment." The village elder, a wise woman who had once served as a naval healer, simply said, "This child was not born to live like ordinary people. He belongs to the sea." And so, the boy was named Alfred Bulltop Stormalong, meaning born in the heart of storm and sea. But the villagers, unable to keep calling out that long-winded name, simply called him Stormy, and later, Old Stormalong. Even as a toddler, Stormalong was different. At 3, he was nearly 2 meters tall. By 4, he could haul in fishing nets that took 3 grown men to lift. When he laughed, fish would swim ashore, drawn by his voice. When he cried, which was rare, the sky would turn gray in moments. No one taught him to swim, yet he glided over waves like a dolphin. Once, after a storm collapsed the village pier, everyone was stranded. 6-year-old Stormalong used his own body as a pillar to support a temporary bridge, letting the villagers cross. The elders were speechless. The children cheered, calling him the sea's hero. Silas, who had raised him, just chuckled, took a puff from his pipe, and said softly, "This boy wasn't born of earth. He's the son of the waves." At 8, Stormalong began joining fishing expeditions. The captains were hesitant at first, but after a few voyages, they all fought to have him aboard. Every time he joined, the catch was larger, the compass truer, the storms either vanished or softened near him. Some even swore they saw him standing at the bow, whispering to the wind, and the wind listened. At 10, Stormalong patched a gaping hole in a ship's hull with his bare hands while the crew panicked. When asked how he did it, he just smiled and said, "A ship's like my own skin. When it hurts, I hurt too." From that day on, the sea no longer called his name with waves, but through stories passed from sailor to sailor. People began to say that young Stormalong was the reincarnated soul of every sailor who had ever given their life to the ocean. A new legend was taking shape about the child of the waves, the giant sailor, the one destined to become the greatest legend of the sea. But destiny still awaited him. Where greater storms raged, mightier ships sailed, and a monstrous foe no one dared to name. Kraken, are you enjoying this epic journey so far? If yes, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to keep sailing with Stormalong in the next chapters. The adventure has only just begun. Chapter 2: The Giant Sailor and His First Ship. Time passed, and Stormalong grew at a rate no one could believe. By the age of 12, he stood over 10 feet tall, with shoulders as wide as a wind-filled sail. Each step he took shook the docks, causing small boats to rattle like they had a fever. The people of New England no longer saw him as a boy, but as a living embodiment of Poseidon in human form. But despite his immense size and supernatural strength, Stormalong kept the soul of a true sailor, humble, quiet, and forever drawn to the sea. He cared nothing for the villagers' awe or fear. What he longed for was a ship of his own. One evening, as the sun sank behind the coastal mountains, Stormalong sat by the pier, gazing out to sea. The wind whispered, and the waves murmured stories. Suddenly, a loud creaking echoed, the sound of wooden wheels as a caravan hauled an enormous frame toward the shipyard. It was the skeleton of the courser, a ship half-built by the finest craftsmen in the East. Its owner, a wealthy merchant from Boston, had gone bankrupt and abandoned the project midway. That massive heap of timber now lay silent, like a lifeless body without a soul. Stormalong approached. His eyes lit up, not with curiosity, but with destiny. He asked the master shipwright, "Can I buy this ship's frame?" The man laughed. "You think you've got the money, giant? That timber was once worth a fortune." Stormalong answered calmly, "I have no money, but I have strength. Let me work without pay until my labor covers the cost." And so, for the next 2 years, he worked tirelessly, carving, sanding, oiling, tying. No one worked harder. No one worked longer. He came to know every grain of wood, every current that would brush the ship's hull. And when it was finally finished, it wasn't just a vessel, it was a part of him. Stormalong named it the Courser of the Waves, a giant ship, over 300 feet long, with 3 masts taller than church steeples and a wheel so massive it took 3 grown men to turn, unless it was him. On launch day, thousands gathered. As Stormalong stepped onto the deck, his colossal figure seemed to merge with the oak, the ropes, and the gleaming white sails. He didn't stand at the captain's helm. He stood at the bow, like a guide leading his ship forward. Cheers thundered across the harbor. "Stormalong! Stormalong! Our giant sailor!" On his maiden voyage, he and his crew weathered 3 mighty storms, dodged Caribbean pirates, and returned with tons of salt, spices, and cloth, astonishing the entire New England coast. They say that during one terrible storm, when the mainmast was split in 2 by lightning, Stormalong himself climbed up, caught the falling topmast with his bare hands, lashed it back with rope, and sailed through the tempest as if nothing had happened. He didn't need a compass. He used his senses. He needed no map. He remembered every sea lane and every wave like the lines on his palm. Rumor had it he could smell the air to find fish, or feel the pressure drop to sense an oncoming storm. But what made his crew loyal wasn't his strength, it was his heart. He never shouted, never left anyone behind. When a young cabin boy fell from the mast, Stormalong dove off the ship into the raging sea to save him. When the old cook got lost in the fog, he went below deck, took his hand, and led him like a son. To everyone, Old Stormalong wasn't just a captain. He was a beacon in the ocean, a symbol of courage and kindness. But then, after 3 years at sea, a strange rumor began to spread, of a dark wave that had swallowed 8 cargo ships in the deep waters east of Bermuda. People whispered of an ancient creature, with tentacles hundreds of feet long, eyes glowing in the night, and a roar that even whales fled from. Stormalong listened but said nothing. He only stood in silence, gazing eastward, where the sea turned darker than anywhere else. Kraken. His instinct told him his true destiny had not yet arrived. And what lay ahead would not be a battle between man and monster, but between will and darkness. Are you ready for the voyage to confront the Kraken? Then like, subscribe, and share to follow the epic journey of Old Stormalong, the giant sailor with the heart of the sea. See you in Chapter 3. Chapter 3. The Encounter with the Legendary Kraken. The east wind howled cold as death's breath. Aboard the courser of the waves, Stormalong stood tall, eyes fixed on the distant, blurry horizon. The sea was not as usual today, unnaturally quiet, its surface black as ink, reflecting the gray clouds like lost souls. The crew, men who had braved storms, fought pirates, and survived the Bermuda Triangle, felt their hands trembling. No one spoke aloud, but everyone sensed it. Something was waiting. Something ancient, ferocious, and awakening. A young sailor asked with a shaky voice, "Captain, do you really believe in the Kraken?" Stormalong didn't turn his head. He simply answered, deep and steady like an undersea current, "I don't need to believe. I've heard it sing. They say the Kraken was born of chaos, when the sea hadn't yet separated shallow from deep, when sky and ocean were one. It had slept for centuries beneath the Mariana Trench, imprisoned by loneliness and cold. But now, iron ships had awakened it. The engines, the metal sounds, the scent of fuel, all had made it furious. And now, it waited for Stormalong, the only rival ever chosen by the sea itself. On the fourth day in the deep waters east of Bermuda, the waves began to stir, not in gusts, but in strange, uneven swells, as if something massive was moving below the surface. Night fell moonless. Only eerie green-blue lights rose from the deep, strange and ghostly. And then the Kraken emerged. Before the horrified crew was a giant shadow, tall as a tower, with tentacles long as Boston's piers. Each movement summoned tsunamis, whirlwinds, and a sound like thousands of souls screaming. A tentacle lashed out, smashing the ship's third mast. Sailors flew like leaves in a storm. Another tentacle wrapped around the helm, dragging the ship toward a forming whirlpool. "Everyone to your posts!" Stormalong roared, his voice booming like thunder. He did not run. Not at all. With a long leap, he grabbed a rope, swung from mast to prow, anchor in hand, the massive anchor only he could lift. His eyes gleamed like steel, not with rage, but with resolve. The Kraken roared. The sound echoed in the hearts of all who heard, enough to make the faint-hearted faint. But Stormalong stood firm. He charged the main tentacle, swinging his anchor like a Viking warrior of the sea. Metal clashed with monster flesh, and black blood burst like ink, staining the sea dark purple. The Kraken screamed in pain, recoiling slightly. But only slightly. More tentacles emerged, now dozens, like a swarm of giant serpents reaching for the ship. The courser rocked violently, wood shattering, sails torn, water pouring into the hull. At that moment, Stormalong turned to his crew and shouted, "Abandon ship! Take the lifeboats! Go now!" One sailor cried out, "What about you, Captain?" He simply smiled, "I'm not done with it yet." Then, in a moment destined for legend, Old Stormalong leapt onto the Kraken's head, where its glowing red eyes stared him down. He raised the anchor and drove it into the monster's forehead. The Kraken screamed, thrashed, and dragged both him and the ship into a massive whirlpool. Waves surged, winds howled, and even the sky seemed to split. And then, silence. The Kraken vanished. No trace remained. The ship was gone too. Only the sea lay still, as if no battle had ever happened. The next morning, the lifeboat crew was rescued by a nearby fishing vessel. When they told their tale, no one believed them, until they pointed to the sea, where a long tear marked the water, deep and straight, as if something had been ripped from the ocean's heart. People called it Stormalong's scar. As for him, he was never seen again. But seasoned sailors still say, on stormy nights, if you stand at the bow and listen closely, you'll hear footsteps in the fog. The steps of a giant man still walking the ocean, guarding the waves, and protecting the sea from monsters awakened from ancient chaos. Old Stormalong did not die. He became part of the sea. Do you believe he's still out there, somewhere in the vast ocean? Like, subscribe, and share if you want to follow the immortal legend of the sea. The man with a giant heart and an unbreakable spirit. See you in Chapter 4. The sea calls, the legend lives on. Chapter 4. The sea calls, the legend lives on. Many years passed since that fateful night when Old Stormalong and the Kraken vanished into the heart of the ocean. The sea still sang its endless song, the winds still howled across ship decks, and voyages still began and ended as they always had. But in the hearts of true seafarers, the legend of Stormalong never faded. In every port, from cold Boston to sun-drenched Havana, people still whispered tales of the giant man who bent storms with his bare hands, whose eyes glowed like molten steel in the face of death, and of the mighty ship, the courser of the waves, now a legend in its own right. But sometimes, legends return. One night, aboard a small cargo ship named Delilah, a young sailor named Sam Carter, great-grandson of a man who once served under Stormalong, was keeping watch at the bow. That night, there was no moon, and the sea was eerily still. Suddenly, from afar, he heard a horn echoing up from the deep, not from any living soul, nor from the wind. The sound of the horn lingered, echoing like a call. Sam shivered, not from fear, but from a strange, unexplainable sense of familiarity. He turned and asked the captain, "Did you hear that, sir?" The old captain furrowed his brow, then froze. "It's the horn of the courser." The entire ship fell silent. Another sailor whispered, "That's impossible. That ship sank over 40 years ago." But before anyone could react, a thick fog rolled in, dense like a curtain of eternity. And through it, they saw a massive ship gliding silently by, without sound, without crew, only flickering green lights and masts reaching the heavens. At the bow stood a giant man, cloaked in a faded sailor's coat, holding a brass horn larger than any instrument ever seen. Sam whispered, "It's him, it's Old Stormalong." And so, the story began again. From that night on, strange reports emerged. Merchant ships sailing through the Bermuda region claimed to have been saved from storms by a shadowy vessel, steered by a giant man. An archaeological ship in the South Pacific once went missing for 3 days during a terrible storm. When found, the chief sailor said a giant hand had pushed them away from the reef, then vanished without a trace. On an uninhabited island, fishermen swore that every year, on the full moon night of July, they heard massive footsteps along the shore, leaving footprints as large as cave mouths. People called it the footsteps of the sea keeper. And that sea keeper was none other than Stormalong. But the story didn't end there. A team of international oceanographers, exploring the Mariana Trench, discovered a strange scar across the seabed, not formed by geology, but as if plowed by a colossal force. Stranger still, in their hydroacoustic recordings, they captured a deep, warm singing voice in Old English, the kind spoken in the early 19th century. It was just one line, but it sent chills down every spine. "Still I sail, through mist and wave, guarding all from a watery grave." Now, Stormalong is no longer just a bedtime tale for children. He has become the guardian of the seas. When storms approach, sailors hang brass compasses on their decks, said to mimic Stormalong's own watch. When crossing oceans, sailors quietly pour a cup of rum into the sea, as tribute to the giant of the storm. And when moonlight shines upon the water, if you listen closely, you may hear footsteps rising from the deep, each one firm, steady, and unyielding. Old Stormalong did not die. He now watches over the deepest waters, where light never touches, to keep wandering souls safe at sea. The legend is not over. It is simply beginning again, with a new generation. Perhaps one day, Sam Carter, and even you, will hear that horn calling your name. And when it does, remember, the sea doesn't call the faint-hearted. It calls those ready to become legends. If you feel the breath of the ocean and the spirit of Stormalong stirring within you, like, subscribe, and share this video. And don't forget to hit the bell to catch the next chapter. Chapter 5. Rebirth, the Heir of the Storm, coming soon. Chapter 5. Rebirth, the Heir to the Storm. Legends aren't meant to be shut away in books. Legends are meant to ignite the fire in those still alive. Since that fateful night, Sam Carter was no longer just a young sailor drifting aimlessly through the waves. Something had awakened in his heart, not just belief in Old Stormalong, but a burning desire to live like him, grand, resilient, and never defeated. Sam began his own journey. Not to hunt treasure, not to gain fame, but to recover the soul of the sea. He sought out places once touched by the legend. He stepped onto the island where Stormalong's first ship was launched. He visited Cape Horn, where it said Stormalong once calmed a storm with his bare hands. He dove into Pensacola Bay, searching for a broken plank from the courser of the waves. Wherever Sam went, people no longer saw him as a mere young man. They called him the heir of the legend. The world is changing. Today's seas hold more than wind and waves. There is plastic waste, oil spills, illegal fishing boats, and ghost ships trafficking humans. The enemies of the 21st century do not have Kraken's tentacles. They come in the form of profit, apathy, and destruction. And Sam understood. It's no longer enough to tell the legend. We must live like the legend. He and a crew of young sailors formed the Stormalong fleet. Not to fight wars, but to protect the sea, assist stranded ships, monitor international waters, and most importantly, to inspire a new generation. They painted the brass horn of Stormalong on every sail. They engraved his words across every deck. Still I sail, through mist and wave, guarding all from a watery grave. On a patrol mission in the Indian Ocean, Sam and his crew received a weak distress signal. A small boat was caught in a whirlpool current, carrying over 70 refugees. No drinking water, no fuel, and a storm was closing in. Most nearby ships ignored the weak signal, but not the Stormalong fleet. Sam stood before the wind chart, watching the storm move faster than expected. A crew member muttered, "If we go in there, we might not make it out." Sam tightened the helm ropes, eyes locked on the gray horizon. He didn't need to shout. Just one quiet sentence. Enough for the entire crew to feel they were sailing inside a legend. If we don't go, who will protect them? The rescue ship Aurora, commanded by Sam, pierced through the storm like an arrow through clouds. The mast trembled violently. Water flooded the deck. A wave as tall as a 5-story building crashed toward them. At that moment, amidst the chaos, the brass horn sounded again. No one held it. No one blew it. Yet the sound soared, strong and unwavering, as if Old Stormalong himself stood beside his heir, lending him strength. Aurora held firm. Sam and his team rescued all 70 passengers and returned them safely to shore. When they docked, something miraculous happened. At the ship's bow, where there had been nothing before, there now sat an old brass horn, covered in sea moss, perfectly placed. No one knew where it came from. The global media hailed Sam as the great sailor of the modern age. But he said only one sentence in the interview. "I'm not great. I'm just living the way the legend taught me to live." Today, the Stormalong symbol is seen across the globe, on marine rescue stations, in school textbooks as a moral compass for seafarers. On navigation apps, there's now a Stormalong mode, helping ships find safer routes for their crews. And every year on July 14th, Boston Harbor celebrates Sea Day, where children gather to hear tales of Old Stormalong and of his heir, Sam Carter. That night, as fireworks light up the sky, people shout together. Winds may shift, waves may rise, but the spirit of the sea guardian shall never fall. Legends don't die. Legends live on in every action we take. Are you ready to become the next heir? If you believe we can all live like a modern-day Stormalong, like, subscribe, and share this video. Don't forget to ring the bell so you won't miss the final chapter. Immortal Waves, a Legacy in the Deep. Chapter 6, The Undying Wave, a Legacy in the Ocean. Some waves never fade. Some people never disappear, because they become living symbols in the hearts of humankind. Old Stormalong wasn't just a legend. He was a lighthouse in the dark, the breath of the ocean, the embodiment of resilience. More than a century has passed since the colossal ship courser of the waves vanished in Kraken's wrath. Yet Stormalong's name has never faded from the minds of those who live with the sea. Today, at prestigious naval academies, cadets still begin their training with the words, "Sail like Stormalong, defend like Stormalong, and dare to sacrifice as he once did." At the International Maritime Museum, there is a display of an ancient wooden plank believed to be from Stormalong's ship. Though weathered by time, carved deep into it are the words, "Still I sail." Sam Carter, the inheritor of the legend, has stood before that plank many times. He always whispers to himself, as long as someone boards a ship for an ideal, Stormalong lives on. And truly, that spirit has never faded. In the freezing Arctic, a fleet of environmental researchers inspired by Stormalong is fighting to save the last ice sheets. In the remote islands of the Philippines, Volunteers bearing the brass horn emblem race to rescue fishermen during storm season. In the Gulf of Mexico, young fishermen have rebuilt a ship modeled after the courser of the waves, offering underprivileged children the chance to experience the ocean, to show them the world is vast as long as their hearts are brave enough. At a memorial for sailors lost at sea, amid thousands of flickering candles, a little girl stood up holding a messy drawing. She said, "When I grow up, I want to be a sailor like Mr. Storm." "Mr. Storm?" A gentle voice from the back row replied, "Stormalong. He would be so proud of you." But perhaps the most extraordinary tale is that of Sam Carter's final voyage. At age 60, after decades of saving lives, teaching, and restoring the legacy of the Stormalong fleet, Sam chose to set sail once more alone. He told no one where he was headed. He left only a note on his desk. "I want to see him." Not to ask anything, but to say, "I did it." The small ship Legacy quietly left the dock. No cameras. No media. 3 weeks later, near the Bermuda waters, contact with the vessel was lost. A massive storm swept through the area, leaving no trace. A national funeral was held for Sam Carter. But something happened that no one could explain. The next morning on the Boston harbor, a young boy playing with a paper boat shouted, "Mom, a huge ship just passed by. It was glowing." No one else saw it. But the wind that day blew strangely strong, carrying the salty scent of the sea. And in the distance, a long, echoing brass horn. A year later, deep beneath the ocean, a research team stumbled upon a bronze plaque nestled among coral reefs. It bore no rust, no scratches. Etched upon it were the words, "Storms may pass, heroes may fall, but the sea remembers." The story of Old Stormalong, of Sam Carter, and the brave souls who followed, is no mere fairy tale. It is a living legacy, reminding us that, no matter how the times change, the human spirit still needs faith, courage, and purpose. In a world full of chaos, you can choose to live only for yourself, or live like a legend. You don't have to fight a Kraken. You don't need a ship longer than the harbor. You just need a heart that refuses to give up. Because Stormalong isn't the name of a man. It's the name we give to anyone who dares to sail into the storm, so that others may rest in peace. Are you ready to become part of the legend? If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone you believe also carries a Stormalong within them. We'll meet again on the ocean of belief.